Hey, welcome to Tell Me How You're Mighty, real talk about cheating. I'm Tracy Shorn, the blogger known as Chump Lady, where I implore people to leave cheaters and gain lives.
And I'm Sarah Gorrell, radio broadcaster by day, single mother of 4. And 13 years ago, my ex walked out on his family for his affair partner. And it didn't feel like it at the time, but my life is so much better without him.
And we're here to tell you that you are mighty. We survived infidelity, and you can too. And this is our podcast. Welcome. Today we're talking with trauma specialist Diane Strickland. You may have noticed her trenchant commentary at the Chump Lady blog or on social media. Diane is a certified community and workplace traumatologist. She's a compassion fatigue specialist and a critical incident responder. And she's also an ordained clergy person. She's done ground support after Canada's 2 largest natural disasters. And she's a trauma survivor herself who started her website, Your Story is Safe Here, to serve wives and partners traumatized by men called, air quotes, sex addicts. And during the pandemic, Diane also wrote the first trauma-informed ministry primary in Canada. Welcome, Diane.
Oh, good to be here.
Yeah, well, I thought we'd get right into the trauma discussion. You're a former chump, and if I understand you, you're also a trauma professional. Were you a chump first and then became a trauma specialist, or you dealt in trauma and then, oh my gosh, now you got handed a plate of it?
Mostly the latter. I was in ministry. I've been ordained for 30 years, and ministry is marinating in trauma. Like people have all kinds of it, and they're bringing it every week in one form or another. But none of us were trained for it. And so when this experience happened to me, and I knew that there was something seriously wrong with me, and I was assessed for CPTSD. And I began to think, I don't know anything about this. So in typical me fashion, I read everything I could get. And I researched everything I could get and was sort of putting in the that's stupid and this is not stupid categories. And then I began to take a lot of courses. Finally, one place that I was taking courses from, the woman who runs it wrote me and said, Diane, will you please take a certification because you obviously know something about this. So I began doing that as well. And it sort of reoriented my work quite a bit. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the whole trauma thing, sort of being immersed in this world of trauma, quite often it's trauma that isn't caused by individuals. I think the difference is with the sort of people that we're talking about is when you've got one person who seems so intent on destroying somebody else's life. It's more of a deliberate act rather than external forces that are beyond anybody's control.
Well, I work in natural disasters, which are beyond our control, but I've worked in unnatural disasters where things are in our control, and it's just very difficult sometimes to change them.
One of the things about your work that I found interesting at Your Story is Safe Here is that you're very vocal about taking on the sex addiction. What are we going to call it? Industry? It seems to be a whole therapy model about sex addiction. And from what I understand you're saying is that we've got to drop this whole codependency language, and that instead of telling women that, and it's generally women, can be men too, that they drove their partners to be sex addicts, that instead we should look at them as abusive individuals that inflicted trauma on an innocent, unknowing person. It just seems that's what it is at the face of it. I don't understand why there's a therapy model that doesn't see that. Could you discuss that? Could you discuss your work a bit?
Well, yeah, I didn't start this, but I certainly challenged it very early on and was thinking this is wrong. The person who really did the research on the codependent thing is Dr. Barbara Steffens, and her PhD was all about this. And she's the one in 2009, she got her PhD based on the research that showed that women who were being called codependent actually met the criteria that they were traumatized. And her book lays that out. And in fact, nearly 70% of the women she studied met the full criteria for CPTSD or PTSD. Now, that's pretty significant.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. And so when they weren't being treated for it in the industry, obviously, they were being treated for this other hybrid thing that was invented in, the latter part of the century, the second half of the last century, and mainly used to target women. to call them something. And it was really a form of gaslighting and blame shifting.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. And of course, I got very angry about that. And along with a lot of other people, that was a moment of, oh my goodness, this whole thing stinks like a rotten fish. And that's where I sort of left that whole train and got on this other one.
That's your mightiness right there.
And I wasn't afraid of saying, when pigs fly, I'm buying.
That narrative is still so strong, isn't it? There are an increasing number of voices like yours saying, hang on a minute, this is a load of old nonsense. But still largely, there's a louder voice that says, that this is the thing to believe.
Well, a whole lot of us took on the industry and we saturated every form we could with a really rational explanation of why this was nonsense.
Good for you.
And I was one of the first voices that publicly called these relationships abusive. And I took an awful lot of heat for that because I was, of course, angry.
Yeah. Well, you can't be an angry woman. I'm curious if either of you have been called codependent in therapy, because when I went to therapy with my abuser, a man who literally threatened to kill me, hunt me down and burn my house down, in addition to being a serial cheater, I was told that I was exquisitely codependent.
That almost sounds like a compliment if you throw in the word exquisite into proceeding.
Oh, yeah. Not just codependent. I'm an overachiever. I was exquisitely codependent. Well, there's certain parts of it I bought, and I even wrote about it in my book, which was that fair enough. I was owning things that were not mine to own. I felt that, I was responsible for his mood, for his behavior. But I see a lot of that now through the lens of I was trying to control the uncontrollable. I was trying to control this raging rhinoceros of chaos, this terrible man. And yes, from whatever my own issues or my own magical beliefs in my powers of rationality or something, I thought I could control that. And it was very freeing to let it go. But I don't think I needed to be called an exquisite codependent. Did either of you get kind of called out as a codependent?
I think I diagnosed myself. I didn't have time for any sort of therapy. I was just literally left. My husband disappeared into the ether. He did all the stuff of trying to come back and keep us both going. But I had 4 children and a job to manage. The youngest child was 2. So the only time I had was in the middle of the night to do the diagnosis myself. And I did actually diagnose myself as codependent during that time when I was doing all the other stuff that you're advised to do, trot around and blame yourself and find excuses for their shocking behavior and look to what you've done to make them behave in this abysmal way. So I did the lot, yeah, but it was all of my own back. Basically, what I found online until I discovered your site.
Oh, God. Oh. How about you, Diane? Are you an exquisite codependent too? Are you part of the club?
I was certainly called that by my ex-husband's therapist, who ordered it to me, of course. But I think what we need to know is that this has been backed off by the sex addiction treatment industry because, of course, women cottoned onto it and that ruined business. And so there was enough conversation about it, but that it didn't mean they then called in all of the people they'd certified in models that were designed to tell people they were codependent. They didn't do that. They just sort of softened the edges of it.
You telling me they didn't issue an apology?
Oh, no. And I don't want the one from them because it means nothing. But what I want is for therapists to stop doing it. And they still do it. They love it. And it's a really insidious kind of thing because at the same time as we're being told we're codependent in the industry, we're advised to do codependent things, like take on responsibilities for checking in with them and making sure they're not being sex addiction activities and stuff. Like that's being the hall monitor is a part of being codependent. So my whole upset about that was that if you didn't go in as a codependent, you came out as one from that whole program. You were asked actually to be codependent, to dial down all your alarm systems that were telling you something's wrong, like anger.
Yes.
Like that's part of your alarm system. And that's one of the mighty things is that when you are able to finally understand that your anger is in fact based on something that's true, is entirely rational, and a sign of your sanity.
Thank you.
I signed up for some advice which sent me a daily email on how to save my marriage. And a lot of that was stuff like make sure you're beautifully presented, put makeup on. If he's behaving in a suspicious way, don't question. Just let it ride, let him get on with it. And it almost encourages you, as you say, to be codependent and to go further down an abusive line.
Oh my God.
So all the time you're trying to save your relationship, you're shutting off your alarm system that's there to protect you and your children. And anger can be a very damaging thing, but anger is not irrational when it's based on something that's true.
No, and I would go further that I think anger can save you. Anger saved me. If you channel it and use it to save yourself. I found the experience very paralyzing, very overwhelming. I mean, I felt my senses were flooded. I was physically sick from this knowledge. I was throwing up. I lost like 15 pounds in a week. My hair was falling out. I mean, we can all talk about the stress illness of these discoveries. You know, I just want to go sleep forever, kind of was a feeling. But anger got me up out of bed. Anger made me call a lawyer. Anger made me get a protection from abuse order. Anger made me fight back. Anger was my best friend during that horrific time. And when I get letters from people on the blog, I always worry about the sad ones. I always worry about the paralyzed ones. And the ones who are snarky, the ones who are spunky, who fight, who find a thread of ridiculousness in it all, I think, okay, they're going to be okay. You know, if I have to triage people as I'm going through letters, I think the ones who are sad and depressed and have turned it inward or are terrified of being angry or called bitter, they have a much harder, longer path.
I agree.
What I also find interesting is you know, you talk about friends there and anger being your friend. But the other thing that I was advised to do is don't talk to anybody else about it. Don't say anything. And abusers rely on alienating you from your friends and family. But it almost seems there's a whole industry propping them up and saying, yeah, you alienate yourself. Don't tell your friends, don't tell your family, because if you do that, it's going to undermine your relationship or your marriage. And in doing so, you're kind of propping up, again, their abusive behavior.
Exactly. We are punished for telling the truth. And we know that doesn't matter what the truth is that we're telling, particularly women. If we're telling it about a man, we're going to be punished for that. And we know that played out in a patriarchal, misogynist society. That's the rule. And so you're going to pay for it. People talk about this, and there's lots of great books about it. But the need to silence us is really important. And furthermore, what happens to a lot of people when they do try to tell a friend or their spiritual leader or whoever, this is what's going on, there's so much detail, and immediately you are cast into the angry woman mode, or she won't forgive, or she gets tone policing. Everybody does it. You know, well, you need to get over this and all that. That stuff is really harmful to continue to silence women. And one of the lines I learned to say very early on about my experience, and I want to share this as a tool, is I didn't say what my ex-husband did to people who asked. I would say, my husband developed a secret life of sexual and sexualized activities that began long before he ever married me and continued throughout my marriage. And it violated every value that was a part of me and our relationship in our vows. And if I had known, I never would have married him. The fact that I didn't say, oh, he's flirting or he's looking at porn or he's having emotional affairs or sexual affairs, that was more horrifying to people, because they didn't know what to say to someone's secret life.
I think you're really onto something. And I have found, if I put it in terms of a double life and take it off the battlefield of sexual rejection, because again, they're like, oh, you're just mad. You didn't win the pick-me dance, you know, poor you. And go, no, you know, you were defrauded. You were deceived. You had these investments. You had these sunk costs. This person benefited from your investment in them. And that is why they kept up this double life. And I think people don't know how to respond to that. And I also think, Diane, I think you come across as even more terrifying. Being an angry woman is probably terrifying. But when you kind of share that vulnerability that, like, I look like a rational person and I was completely hoodwinked by this person, that's a very scary thing.
Yeah, it is.
I love the way you changed the narrative as well, because I think sometimes that when you say, oh, my husband had an affair or my wife had an affair, the implication is that they arrived to you perfect and somehow your behaviour drove them to affair. I'll never forget my ex-mother-in-law saying to me, what did you do to drive my son to an affair? And there's a lot of that narrative. But from what you say, it makes it clear that they arrived in your life flawed and they went out of your life flawed, and there was nothing that you did in between that made them the way that they are.
Yeah, we're disempowered by not having the information. If we had the information about who they were, we would have made different decisions, but we didn't have that chance. And that's why we get angry.
Let me stop you there, because if we had the information about who they were and we wouldn't have made that decision, some people have the information. Some people had big red flags or things that were shady, that were dodgy, whatever. And I would argue that the reason they go forward is because this abuse is so minimized. Oh, did he fuck a sex worker? Yeah, boys will be boys. Whatever it is. Because not only do we not ask ourselves, is this acceptable to us, but we shame people for having boundaries around this kind of thing. You're not cool. Or we have all this, you said, softening of the language. The therapy is very blurry about these lines. So how are we to impose them in our own life? I could genuinely say I would never have married, my cheating ex if I had known what he was up to. But I also know from letters that I get that it feels like a very fuzzy gray zone to them. And they feel these pressures that I have to be married, I have to keep my family together, I have to do all these things, or I am a second-class citizen because I am a single mother and I need a strong man in my life, or another provider, or whatever it is. There's so many messages that tell you, try harder, you're nothing without a partner. And I think those are equally toxic. So yes, not only tell people to try to figure out who they are before you commit to them, but that you're really okay if you don't have a partner in your life. Be mighty first, be your own person before you look for someone. I think a lot of why I wound up with a serial cheater, and it's not like I didn't know, I don't have, special powers, but I would have been a single mother for years. I had a little kid, I was doing it on my own. It was hard, and you get love bombed, and that's nice. Someone unloads your dishwasher, like, woo, I'm living large here. But if I'd had different messages, I think there might have been a different outcome.
I think it's interesting because I interviewed a victim of the most horrific domestic abuse a couple of days ago, and she told me her story, and she talked about how her friends had warned her against him, how he was very violent and aggressive. And I asked the question, I said, why did you keep going back? And then as I was doing this, I thought, but I did, when my husband had an affair, and, I knew he was mentally abusing me, but I didn't see it in the same way that you see the same narrative in physical abuse. And I don't think you see it in society either. I still think you see television programs where the affair partner is some glamorous, wonderful individual who rescues their affair partner from some horrible, dull domestic drudgery where the woman's become a nag and a bit of a nuisance, and she almost deserves what she gets.
Yeah, I think that all those points are good. I like to think of it as my electrical breaker panel. And there's a lot of factors involved in why our alarm systems get turned off, why our critical thinking processes get turned off. And I like to think of the process. And we know that physically abused women take 7 cracks before they ever really get out. I think of that as 7 breakers on the control panel. And it's takes that long to get them all running again, to understand when we say, wait a minute, this is the only life I get, and this is awful. And it takes a long process to get there. And it is all the influences, like you mentioned, Tracy, the whole banquet of reasons why people feel that the relationship couldn't be that bad.
Well, the truth of it is that no abuser is abusive all the time. I mean, they all got hooks. You weren't a total idiot for marrying them or committing to them. And then they usually do operatic remorse, or they promise they're going to be different, or, they play on your absolute worst fears. Do you want to be with those 4 children alone? and no one will ever love you again. And, all the boogeymen, they all get trotted out.
And the treatment industry also doesn't recognize abuse. I don't know why they don't, but they don't. So they talk about having conflict. They don't know the difference between conflict and abuse.
Say that again, louder for the people in the back, because that is such an important point.
Conflict is about where you have a struggle or disagreement, different points of view about all kinds of things, including the resources that have power and ideas and all kinds of things. Abuse is when someone uses their resources or power to control or harm you. You cannot have a marital reconciliation or treatment program with an abuser when the therapist is calling it conflict.
Amen. I am so excited that you are saying this stuff out loud. I thank you.
Well, it's one of the things that makes women more angry. I'm remembering a friend who was in the same stew as I was in, going to marriage therapy. And, she talked about, his use of, he was using hookers and all kinds of stuff. And it was then his turn to talk about what her offenses were. And the best he had was that she left her coffee cup on the patio for 2 days.
Oh my God.
This is the crap that goes down. Like the therapist industry. And I have had wonderful therapists in my life over, my 67 years. So I'm not against therapy. It's like every other industry, including ministry. There are some people who are just not very good at all. And there are some that are superb. And there are some that are in the middle, but they're not going to hurt you.
Well, and they're prone to cultural biases. They're prone to whatever the conventional wisdom is of the day. And it's absolutely, pickled in the language and the therapy and the point of view that they have. Talk about the conflict versus the abuse situation. Within days of my first D-Day or second D-Day, I went to marriage counseling with my cheater and picked someone on the health plan close to his office, so it wouldn't inconvenience him terribly. And I wrote about it in the book. I make fun of the bearded man in the sweater vest, but, he was all, let me sit in a pose of non-judgment and listen to you. And I was 24 hours off of this man flying into a rage, telling me that he was going to hunt me down and burn down my house and kill me if I told anybody what he had done. And I told this therapist in the office. And he paused and he turns to my ex and he goes, and how does that make you feel? No, and how does that make you feel? And I think he said, and Tracy, what do you want? And one of my demands was I want you to get an STD test. I mean, God knows where you've been. And he said, it makes me feel punished. And I was so in shock. And at the end, we all stand up, our 45 minutes are over. And he says solemnly, this is a real nugget of wisdom. He goes, you two need to learn to dialogue. Okay, and now he is immortalized forever as a cartoon in my book with his beard and his sweater vest and his bad advice.
But the problem is since that happened to you, there are still people in sweaters and with beards and in various guises who are colluding with abusers effectively, justifying this behaviour and trying to blame shift it onto the person who is the injured party.
And if you had said that, Tracy, to him, that you were going to do all those things to him, you would have been an angry and dangerous woman.
Oh, that's right. Yes. But I was an angry and dangerous woman.
And this is where we have to claim our mightiness to say, well, I'm only angry about things that are true and that violate basic justice. That's what I'm angry about. Anytime we're going to want to talk about what's true and we have a point of view, that's trouble. So that is a part of that whole industry. And in the sex addiction treatment industry, it was just rife and it's still there. Oh, she's angry. Oh, women's anger. Oh, when you tell them that, they go out of their minds and as if they're the problem.
Well, so what do you tell your clients when people come to you and they go, I'm angry or I got called angry? Do you have a script for them? You're like, yes, I am. Yes, I am. This is some fucked up shit and I'm mad.
Yeah, I have a lot of women who are, because mostly they come to me after they've spent, tens of thousands of dollars in the industry. And so they wash up on my shore. And they're full of rage. And when it is apparent, I simply tell them, I take your anger as a sign of your sanity. And the thing about a woman being angry is that when you let them be angry and you say something like that, they don't have to be angry anymore. We have to continue to be angry because the truth of the experience is still being denied. That's what makes us so angry. And that's where it gets suppressed. And Sandra Thomas in the nursing profession did all of this research. But what happens to us when we suppress our anger? And we get really, really sick. Our bodies become ill. We have mental health issues. But society's okay with women being sick or medicated because they're not angry then.
Anything but angry.
Anything but angry. So it's about transforming that. And I understand that anger can go off the rails. I haven't met anybody yet where it's gone off the rails. Once they tell you what they're angry about, yeah, I'm angry about that too.
Well, I think anger can be misdirected. I mean, we get occasional revenge scenario, fantasy, whatever, or it gets directed at the affair partner, which I think affair partners, people should be angry at them. But the reconciliation industrial complex channels the anger at the affair partner, I think, and encourages the pick-me dance. Like, that he seduced you, or that wily woman with her feminine guiles, took your man, you better lock that down. I mean, there's a lot of misdirected anger, a dispersal of your energies so that you don't advocate for yourself and you don't get out. I would say that people are afraid of anger or chump anger because it upsets the power balance. And this is true for men or for women. If you call it what it is, abuse, and you see it for what it is, that this person is living a double life and harming you and risking your health, then you will topple the apple cart. You will take away all the goodies and all the entitlements. I mean, this is true in history. It's true in politics. It's true when you organize, you get the vote, you get labor rights, you get all the things that all the people who are enjoying the goodies don't want to share. And that's why I don't like your anger, because it's effective.
And as you say, anger is a normal emotion when you've had a lot of bad things done to you. But the way that it's used sometimes is it's not implying you're angry. It's implying that you're unhinged.
Yes.
For having reaction to this level of abuse directed at you. It's implying it's wrong and that your emotion is completely wrong, when in fact it's entirely natural. Anybody would be angry.
It's not just natural, it's rational. That's what we have to learn to say. It's that it is natural and it's rational.
I think rational is such an important point. I remember when I went through it, and I would, in these stupid therapy models, you try to have the conversation, where they're supposed to answer your questions or whatever. The homework was, I would ask a question and I got, well, I can't answer that. I don't like your tone. When you can calm down and you can ask me in a more rational way that question, well, then maybe I'll consider answering, but you're too upset. It's a conversation stopper.
Yes, it is. And it's how you silence people, silence anyone who has endured harm from you. And the silencing of the victim is very important to maintain the distribution of power, to maintain the industry, to maintain the income, which is one of the reasons I would never go to any of these therapy things. I thought, I'm not paying you to do that to me. But I understand how desperate people, I had a career. So I knew, I'd be poor, but I could live. Other people are not in that situation. When we talk to women, often what we're doing is helping them plan. If they can't leave right away, we try to make a plan, but it's the denial that their anger has any reason, any rational aspect to it. That is the disempowering piece and the silencing piece.
Can you talk a bit about how the therapy has shifted? You were saying at the beginning that they responded to your criticism and they softened their approach. But it sounds like the approach is still pretty awful and blame shifty, but maybe they soft pedal it. I think of Esther Perel becoming a trauma specialist, just what came to mind with me.
Yeah, I know. You can't change people. You can only change yourself. There are some people who changed, but most of them don't have to, because particularly in sex addiction, it's an epidemic. Like, how much money do I need to give you is the way it is. And it's also more difficult in that if you want to talk about codependency, a lot of the therapists have a codependent relationship with the therapeutic model because they're sex addicts.
Really?
Yes, that industry is full of people who rehabilitated themselves and then became therapists. Supposedly all of this is sort of in quotes. When we had the codependency blame game on the women, that allowed them to implement it. So they were in fact still abusing women.
Do they have to disclose, I am a sex addict, now therapist?
They don't.
Oh, really?
Some of them do, because some of them think that's an advertising tool. As I beat it. And certainly a lot of people did go to people like that because they thought this would be someone and sometimes there's husband and wife teams.
Oh, Lord.
But the point here is that there is no research that suggests there is any long-term recovery better than the spontaneous recovery of 5%, which is, the truth for most addictions. So they have never in the however 40 or 50 years of their modeling done one piece of publishable longitudinal research to prove anything.
Well,
that makes me angry. And I don't know why it doesn't make a lot of other people angry.
oh, I completely agree.
But that's another place where if you raise it, they get really upset. They get angry because you're bringing it forward. Well, we can't ask people. Why not? That's how you do research in the field of psychology, to find out if what you're doing is right. So people are so desperate. They're so desperate that there just isn't enough pressure for that. So anger is important for clarifying things, and a lot of decision making needs to be made with some kind of clarity and putting the breakers back on.
Well, thank you. Can you tell us where people can read more of your work and find you?
Sure. Your story is safehere.com is my site, and there's a gazillion blogs. Lots of them talk about anger because it comes up a lot.
Well, send me the link so I will put it in our show notes.
Thanks for a chance to chat. Thank you both for everything you're doing.
Reach out to us. You can check us out at tellmehowyourmighty.com or check out the blog at chumplady.com. I'm always open to your suggestions there.